What are the best low-level general feats in Pathfinder 2e? Which ones are they? And generally, how much should you care about general feats? Aha, a lot. This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to go over my top 5 low-level general feats and explain what makes them so good. I imagine that most advanced players are well aware of these feats, and while this video is more aimed at newer players, even pros might learn a thing or two here. So I'll quickly go over what general feats are all about, how to get them ASAP, and then we'll go into the list itself, as ever, in no particular order. I'll be going over level 1 general feats only, even though non-humans aren't going to be able to access them until level 3, as far as I'm aware anyway. This doesn't mean that you have to pick human to get these, just that this list is for the level 1 general feats only, whether you take them at level 1, level 3, or beyond. And note that any character can choose the feats from this list, as they have no prerequisites. As ever, if you find this video helpful or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing. On with the music. So, general feats. From my understanding of PF2E, general feats are all about giving players the ability to further customize their character outside of their class and ancestry. So if you want to give a bit of tankiness to your wizard, or you want to give it a bit of extra speed to your slow-moving fighter, then you can with general feats. Normally, you do not gain access to general feats until level 3, but if you choose human, you can pick the versatile human heritage and immediately gain a general feat. Humans also gain access to the general training ancestry feat from level 1, meaning that you can access it if you use a mixed heritage and pop human in there, which would immediately give you a level 1 general feat. Or you can pick a skilled human and grab it as your level 1 ancestry feat, along with the free skill. But whether you grab them at level 1 or level 3, general feats can be exceptionally good, and it was really tricky picking just 5 for this video chapter, and I may have to do more videos on more general feats at some point. Before I dive in though, I have a little bit of a potential suggestion here to GMs out there, just something to consider. In an effort to allow my players to pick different ancestries other than humans, for the players who love getting general feats ASAP, I started allowing my parties to all get a general feat for free at level 1. I think this drastically opens up potential character ideas for those who are sort of min-maxers by default. And even for players that don't build characters that way, it allows you to further customize your character right from the get-go with some of the feats I'll be mentioning in this list, rather than having to wait until level 3. Just keep this in mind as I list these general feats, as this house rule really allows your players to tailor-make their PCs straight away. I've had nothing but good feedback from this particular house rule, and it's just something that I thought other GMs may consider adding to their games. But anyway, let's dive into the list itself, starting with number 1. Fleet. Fleet simply increases your speed by 5 feet, and as with a lot of stuff in PF2E, this is deceptively simple. Honestly, I think this general feat is massively underrated. I think a lot of the advanced players probably know how powerful that extra 5 feet can actually be, especially in the lower levels, but newer players in particular are going to look at this general feat and just go, meh. But you really have to start considering all the intricacies of Pathfinder's combat to really understand how good this general feat actually is. I cannot emphasize how many times there's going to be when you need just 5 more feet to get in range for your spell or ability to hit, or just to get in range to heal an ally, or just to get in range to hit with a melee weapon. And then there's going to be times when you needed just 5 more feet to get out of range of that area of effect, or where you needed 5 more feet to get into cover. And of course, you're probably still going to be able to do these things without this extra 5 feet, because you usually have 3 actions every turn, but it's going to cost you one of those precious actions. And when you realize that just taking that one teeny tiny little general feat could have saved you an action, one that could potentially decide your survival or victory, etc., you're gonna want to slap yourself. I actually remember a particular session that I had where I felt like I watched a player's soul leave their body when they realized they couldn't quite hit the enemy with a spell to stop them fleeing and getting reinforcements. All because they were 5 feet too far away from the range of their spell. And that was at level 3 when they just skipped over it for something else. I think people don't consider it to be that good, possibly due to it being one of those holdovers from Dungeons and Dragons. When movement is effectively free, and I say that in inverted commas, 5 feet of extra movement doesn't seem that big. But in PF2E, where movement is directly tied to how many actions you have, this movement speed becomes extremely valuable, especially when you consider that there's actions in PF2E that can cost 2 or 3 rather than just 1. To top that off, there are some ancestries that only get 20 feet movement speed to start with, and grabbing this general feat effectively negates that. And there's also times when your equipment will slow you down, and again, grabbing fleet will remove that little issue. There's definitely going to be some particular character builds that aren't going to need speed as much as others, but I I genuinely think that almost all characters could benefit from having an extra 5 feet speed, especially in the early levels, and I highly consider you give Fleet a fair trial before deciding against it. I can absolutely guarantee that there's going to be many times in your campaign that having just 5 feet extra movement would have saved you an action. Alright, next up is number 2, Toughness. Toughness increases your health by your level, and it also reduces the DCs of recovery checks by 1, something often overlooked or forgotten. The latter in my case. Shut up, I'm a good GM. Unlike Fleet, I would say this one is actually relatively simple. But just like Fleet, it's also one of those feats where basically most characters are going to benefit from having it. Extra health is never a bad thing, especially in PF2E where it's very easy to get struck by an unlucky crit because of the 4 degrees of success. Crits happen very often in PF2E, and there's going to be many a time when you're left with 1, 2, or 3 HP, and in those times you will be so grateful that you took Toughness. It's one of those feats that a lot of people would imagine works best on your frontliners or your tanky melee characters. But honestly, everyone gets hit in PF2E, from area of effect abilities from creatures like dragons to sneaky invisible monsters that target your weaker characters. Everyone is going to get hit in PF2E, especially if your GM is a capricious SOB, something I've been called on more than one occasion, and even once when I was GMing. And considering that the penalty for getting knocked unconscious only gets higher and higher if you aren't fully healed, a tiny bit of extra HP can massively change the outcome of a challenging battle, whether you're a ranged attacker, healer, or melee tank. As for the recovery checks, which kick in when you're on the floor dying, again, everyone will be doing these at some point. There are probably going to be certain characters that do this more than others, but still, this is one of those things that can save your life in a pinch. That +1 honestly could be, has been, and will be the difference between life and death in some very dire situations. Plus, having more numbers on your HP bar is just nice, isn't it? Who doesn't like to see bigger numbers? Every part of me is trying my best not to turn this into a crass joke, so let's move on before I do. On to number 3, Canny Acumen. Canny Acumen allows you to immediately boost one of your saves from Trained to Expert, or your Perception from Trained to Expert. And at level 17, you become a Master in your choice. The math for this is pretty simple. You basically gain a +2 in one of your saving throws, or a +2 to your Perception. As different classes in PF2E get different proficiencies in saving throws and Perception, each class can make use of this in different ways. And that level 17 bonus of another +2 may seem kind of irrelevant, but pretty much all classes are stuck with 1 or even 2 saving throws on Expert only, even at level 20, and getting to boost it to Master is actually pretty great. And of course, boosting Perception to Expert from level 1 or level 3 is pretty phenomenal if your class doesn't get that, because Perception is just an unbelievably good thing to have as high as possible. From my experience, Perception checks were probably done more than any other kind of checks, and healers should get good Perception. People think that healers should go last, but if they go first, they can quickly pop up a buff spell or whack an enemy before they start their healer duties. Boosted Perception will allow you to do that, as will the incredible initiative General Feats, but shut up, we're not talking about that in this one. Shh. As ever, a +2 might not seem like a lot, but keeping in mind the 4 degrees of success, there's going to be many times where having that +2 will save you from a crit fail from a spell or effect, and it's in these extremely clutch situations that you'll thank yourself for not letting that saving throw stay crappy. Actually getting to make your skinny wizard better at those fortitude saves, or your lumbering barbarian better at those reflex saves, is something that's pretty incredible. And there's going to be times where you miss a hidden door or trap or whatever due to poopy Perception, and a +2 can be a big deal there, especially when, as I said, Perception checks happen so freaking often in PF2E. I'd say that some classes would benefit more from this than others, so it's definitely a mileage may vary sort of feat, but it's still one of those to definitely keep in mind when you next gain access to a general feat. Moving on, number 4, Adopted Ancestry. This feat allows you to pick another ancestry and add the ancestry feats to your list of choices the next time you gain access to ancestry feats. It's effectively the same as picking a mixed ancestry, but without the genetic and probably physical differences you get with being a mixed ancestry. This is probably one of those things that you need to discuss with your GM, and it's kind of a strange general feat anyway if you don't pick it all that early on. So the idea is that you've spent significant time with a particular ancestry and you've kind of picked up some of their traits, I guess, which is why it's bizarre if you take this at like level 11 or whatever. It's like, when did you immerse yourself in that culture? You've been out with us fighting dragons and monsters all this time. Have you been sneaking off without telling the parties to get drunk with the dwarves every night? Or did you go off burning things with the goblins? It's kind of weird. But anyway, as for the mechanical benefits of this general feat, they're pretty great because some ancestries have pretty scarce selections when it comes to ancestry feats, and Adopted Ancestry just effectively opens them up quite drastically in some cases. Obviously, picking human is a good shout because humans arguably get some of the best ancestry feats in the entire system, and it makes a lot of sense lore-wise as humans are generally everywhere on Golarion. Though I'd say Elf and Dwarf are also very strong contenders. It does mention that some of the physiological abilities that these ancestries get might not be something that you can grab because that doesn't really make any sense. If you're an orc, should you you really be able to phase from reality briefly like a gnome does with unexpected shift? Or should a goblin be resistant to immobilized, paralyzed, and slowed conditions like elves can be with elven verve? And don't get me started on ancestries that can fly. It'd be really bizarre if your dwarf suddenly sprouted Strix wings. Obviously your GM may allow some stuff and may disallow some others, so it's just one of those feats that may work for you or may not, depending on the situation. As ever, discuss with your GM before you take a feat like this one. And the funny thing here is that if you do pick human, next time you get an ancestry feat, you could pick general training and get even more general feats like a crazy person. Right, onto my last top 5 general feat. Number 5, Diehard. Not the movie. Diehard does exactly what it says on the tin, even though it's not a tin, it's a feat. And if you didn't know that, there's something wrong with you. It simply increases when you actually die from dying 4 to dying 5. In basic terms, when you lose all your HP in a fight in PF2E, you would fall unconscious at dying 1, and each subsequent time you get knocked down or fail your save, it goes up until you reach dying 4 where you actually die. Diehard just simply increases this to dying 5. Again, it's one of those teeny tiny increases that in a pinch may absolutely save your character's life, and I have seen this happen more than once. Literally twice. I've seen it happen twice. I think this is one of those feats that's very good for new players because it gives them a little bit of a buffer to them actually dying. It's kind of like a tiny safety net for them to make things a little less scarier. And this allows for, I guess, characters that are less inclined to worry about taking hits. What I'm saying is it effectively allows a crazy character to run into a fight, go mental, and not worry too much about dying instantly. And because of how the 4 degrees of success work when you are not unconscious, you can immediately jump to dying 2 if it's a crit that actually knocks you down initially. Having this feat effectively negates that particular scenario, as you've gained another recovery chain, meaning that crits can be a little less scary to deal with. Obviously crits are still terrifying, but you know, every +1 matters, remember, even if it's not a +1 in the traditional 4 degrees of success sense. And if you combine Diehard with Toughness, it's not only harder to knock you down and not only easier for you to get back up, but it's also harder for you to fail ultimately and perish. As ever, keep on the lookout for ways to combine feats, abilities, and other features in PF2E for maximum effect. I also think that Diehard is going to be much more useful in a party with limited healing capabilities. If you've got multiple healers, you're probably not going to need it so much. Okay, that's my list of the top 5 general feats at lower levels. Quite frankly, most of these you're probably going to get some use out of even in the higher levels. And considering how many feats there are in PF2E, I'm really thinking about having a look at more of them and doing more video chapters on different types and what I believe are your best choices. If you think this is a good idea, let me know in the comments below, and if there's any general feats that you think I definitely missed out on mentioning, pop it in the comments as well, and I'll try my best to reply to every one of you. Hopefully you've learned a thing or two about the feats I've mentioned, and it might be enough to save your character's life someday. And if not, well, I hoped you enjoyed me blabbering on seemingly endlessly. If not, sucks to be you. As always, if you found this video helpful or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I really appreciate the support. But for now, this is Dominic of the Domininomicon, wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.